The envelope lay like a wound on Richard Montgomery's desk, its cream-colored surface pristine, its golden embossing catching the late afternoon light. He had opened it with careful fingers as if afraid the paper itself might cut him, and now the card inside trembled slightly in his hand. Elizabeth Carter and William Harrington request the honor of your presence. The words stared up at him, elegant and merciless. Richard's jaw clenched. He read them again, though every syllable was already carved into his memory like acid on stone. Elizabeth, the woman who had once pressed her hand to his chest and whispered forever, woman who had walked away when forever no longer included children. He remembered that night as clearly as if it were yesterday. The rain against the windows, the fire flickering low, her voice soft but cutting. You can't give me what I want most in life. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't cried. She had simply twisted off the ring he had placed on her finger months earlier and set it on the coffee table, the small metallic clink echoing louder than any argument. Then she walked out of his life, leaving the air in his apartment colder than the storm outside. Now she was marrying someone else, someone who could give her the family she wanted. Richard tossed the invitation onto the desk as if it were poisonous. It landed on the polished mahogany with a whisper, but the sound still made his chest tighten. He pushed himself up from the leather chair, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. His office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and commanding view of the Seattle skyline, felt suddenly claustrophobic. All the power he had built, Montgomery Innovations, the company that had made him a millionaire by the time he was 35, seemed hollow in that moment. He had influence, wealth, a penthouse that towered over the city, but when the world went quiet, he was still alone. The phone on his desk buzzed. He glanced at the screen inside. Marcus. He considered ignoring it but pressed accept. You got it, didn't you? Marcus's voice carried its usual bluntness. Richard exhaled slowly. The wedding invitation. That's the one. What are you going to do with it? Recycle bin, Richard replied, his voice deliberately steady. Don't be an idiot. You should go. Richard barked out a short, humorless laugh. And why would I subject myself to that? You think I want to sit there and watch her walk down the aisle with another man? To see her smile at him the way she used to smile at me? You should go, Marcus insisted. Show her you're not broken. That you've moved on. The words sliced through him. Richard turned toward the window, staring at his own reflection in the glass. A tall man, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, every inch the image of success. And yet his reflection seemed like a stranger, hollow behind the eyes. It did break me, Marcus, he whispered, though not into the phone. Out loud, he only said, I'm not interested in games. It's not a game, Marcus said, softer now. It's closure. Sometimes you've got to look the past in the eye to finally bury it. When the call ended, silence filled the room. Richard stood there with the skyline spread out before him, the city lights beginning to flicker against the dusk. From here, he could see the world, every avenue, every glowing tower, every fragment of success he had built. Yet none of it could silence the echo of Elizabeth's words. None of it could fill the empty space her absence had left. He turned back to the desk. The invitation still lay there, mocking him with its golden letters. He slipped it into the drawer and poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the last glimmer of sunlight as he stepped onto the terrace. The air was cool, the wind brushing his face like a whisper. He raised the glass, staring at the horizon. I won't let her win, he murmured to the night. But even as the words left his lips, the question lingered like smoke in his chest. Would he go? Would he face her again? The city below offered no answers. Only the promise that fate had already begun to stir, setting pieces into motion Richard could not yet see. Rain poured down in silver sheets, blurring the Seattle night into a watercolor of neon signs and shivering reflections on wet asphalt. Richard tightened his coat around him as he left the restaurant, the echo of clinking glasses and business chatter still ringing in his ears. Deals made, contracts signed, wealth multiplied, yet none of it mattered as he stepped into the storm, his mind already circling back to the ivory envelope locked away in his desk drawer. Elizabeth. Always Elizabeth. The parking garage loomed a block away, its fluorescent lights flickering like watchful eyes. He quickened his pace, not out of fear, but because his thoughts were heavy and he wanted nothing more than silence. That was when he saw them, two small figures huddled beneath the awning of a shuttered bookstore. At first he thought they were shadows cast by the storm, but then the smaller shape shifted, pressing closer to the larger one. A blanket, tattered, soaked, threadbare, was pulled around both of them like armor against the world. Children. Richard stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, rain soaking through his expensive wool coat. The city moved around him, cars hissing by, a couple rushing past with an umbrella, a cab honking impatiently. But his gaze was fixed on the pair across the street. The older girl, perhaps 10, lifted her head. Even from a distance he could see the sharpness in her eyes, a wary glint that didn't belong to someone her age. She looked at him as if she had been watching the world long enough to know danger when she saw it. Her arm tightened protectively around the smaller child nestled against her side. The younger one, no more than 6, clutched a ragged teddy bear to her chest. She didn't look up. She didn't move. She simply leaned into her sister as if the act of pressing close could keep the storm, and the world, from swallowing her whole. Richard's chest constricted. He knew he should keep walking. This wasn't his business. The city was full of tragedies. One man couldn't fix them all. And yet something rooted him in place, something more than pity. It was the way the older girl's eyes dared him to come closer, not begging, not pleading, challenging. Before he realized it, Richard was crossing the street, the rain splashing against his polished shoes. He stopped a few feet away, careful not to loom over them. "Are you two all right?" he asked, his voice gentle but steady. The older girl shifted, pulling the blanket tighter. "We're fine," she said quickly, the words carrying an edge sharper than her small frame suggested. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Richard continued, his hands visible, his tone soft. "It's late, and this rain—" He gestured around them, droplets glistening in the glow of a nearby streetlight. "It's getting worse." Her eyes narrowed, studying him with suspicion. The younger one peeked up at him then, wide-eyed and silent, her teddy bear slipping slightly in her grasp. Richard tried again. "There's a diner around the corner. Warm food, hot chocolate. You don't have to take anything from me, just let me buy you dinner." The older girl's jaw tightened. "We don't need charity," her words cut, but Richard only nodded. He remembered another voice years ago telling him what he couldn't give, what he lacked. He knew the sting of rejection, the stubborn armor people built around themselves. "It's not charity," he said softly. "Just one person helping another." The smaller girl tugged on her sister's sleeve. A whisper passed between them, too low for him to hear. Finally, the older one spoke again, her voice lower, less rigid. "I'm Lily," she said at last. "This is my sister, Emma." Richard inclined his head almost like a bow. "I'm Richard." He glanced toward the corner. "There's a diner that makes the best hot chocolate in the city. If nothing else, you could try that." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the rain. Then Lily gave the smallest of nods, tugging Emma to her feet. 20 minutes later, Richard sat across from them in a red vinyl booth under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. He watched in silence as the girls devoured their food. The plates emptied with astonishing speed, but their manners never faltered. Napkins in laps, quiet thank yous to the weary waitress. Only now could he see them clearly. Their clothes were worn but clean, their faces smudged but not unhealthy. Emma's hair was tangled around her cherubic face, while Lily's was pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail that made her look older than her years. "Where are your parents?" Richard finally asked, unable to contain the question. Lily's eyes flickered with something, pain then steel. "They're gone." His throat tightened, but he didn't push. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" A hesitation. Then, "We manage." Richard nodded slowly, his mind whirring. He should stop here. Pay for their meal, wish them well, maybe call someone. But the sight of them, two small souls clinging to each other in a world that didn't care, gnawed at something deep inside him. Thought crept into his mind. Absurd, unreasonable, and yet it refused to leave. He leaned forward, voice steady. "I have a proposition." Lily's eyes narrowed again. "What kind of proposition?" Richard raised both hands. "Nothing improper. Nothing like that. I have an event this weekend. A wedding. And I could use some company." Lily stiffened, suspicion etched in every line of her small body. "I have a big house." Richard continued. "Plenty of space. You'd be safe there. Just the weekend. No strings." You can leave any time you want. Emma looked at her sister, clutching the teddy bear tighter. Her voice was small but certain. Lily, I want to go. The older girl studied Richard for a long moment, as though she could see straight through his chest into the hollow places he didn't show the world. Finally, she nodded once. Write it down, she said. Richard tore a napkin from the dispenser, scrawled his number, and slid it across the table. Call me if you decide yes, day or night. As he walked back into the storm, his pulse raced. He had no idea why he'd done it. No idea what he had just set in motion, but something deep inside him whispered that fate had just changed its course. Forever. Richard's penthouse loomed over the Seattle skyline like a fortress of glass and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the night, lights glittering below like constellations trapped in the city. Inside, everything gleamed. Polished marble floors, chrome fixtures, pristine leather furniture. Not a pillow out of place, not a fingerprint on the glass. And into this immaculate world stepped Lily and Emma. They stood just inside the doorway, clutching their small duffel bag, so light Richard doubted it held more than a change of clothes. Rain dripped from their shoes onto the marble floor, spreading small puddles that would have once driven his housekeeper into a frenzy. But Richard didn't move to stop it. He only watched. Emma's eyes grew wide, darting around the space. It's like a castle, she whispered, half in awe, half in fear. Lily's hand tightened on her sister's shoulder. It's just a house, she said firmly, though Richard caught the flicker of wonder in her own eyes before she masked it. Their presence unsettled the penthouse. The silence that usually felt like control now felt oppressive, as though the walls themselves disapproved of these intruders. Richard felt it too, a strange tension between his ordered life and the chaos these two small girls carried with them. Would you like a tour? He asked, his voice softer than he intended. Emma nodded eagerly, but Lily shook her head. We're fine here. He hesitated, then crossed to the kitchen, the click of his shoes loud in the vast space. Are you hungry? There's food. Anything you want. We already ate, Lily said quickly, though her eyes flicked toward the refrigerator. Richard opened it anyway, revealing a line of neatly organized containers, labeled and dated. Meals his personal chef prepared weekly. Grilled salmon, quinoa salads, vegetable soups. Emma leaned forward slightly, nose wrinkling before retreating behind her sister. Not real food, Lily muttered under her breath. Something in Richard cracked. He pulled off his jacket, tossed it carelessly on a chair, something he hadn't done in years, and rolled up his sleeves. Then let's make some, he said. For a moment, both girls just stared at him. Then Emma's eyes brightened. He found flour, eggs, milk, pancakes at midnight. Absurd, indulgent, utterly unlike him. But as the stove hissed to life and the first pancake sizzled in the pan, Emma giggled, a sound so pure it seemed to echo against the cold marble and shatter the room's emptiness. Lily tried to stay guarded, arms crossed, but when Richard flipped the pancake high and caught it with the pan, a reluctant smile tugged at her lips. By the time the stack was finished, the air smelled of butter and sugar, the kitchen warm with steam. The girls ate with hands sticky and faces glowing, and Richard found himself laughing, really laughing for the first time in years. But later, when the plates were cleared and the giggles faded into yawns, the fragility of the moment returned. He showed them the guest rooms, each sleek and impersonal, the beds dressed in crisp white sheets. Emma climbed onto one and hugged her teddy bear close. It's so soft, she murmured. Lily lingered by the door, arms folded, eyes darting from the bed to Richard. Why are you doing this? She asked bluntly. He froze. Doing what? Letting us stay here. Feeding us. Taking us to some fancy wedding. People don't do things like that without wanting something. Her voice was low but fierce, every syllable a shield. Richard swallowed hard. I don't want anything from you, Lily. She stared at him, unblinking. Then why? The question lodged in his chest. Why indeed? He could have walked past them. He could have left them to the rain. He could have kept his life clean and untouched. But he hadn't, because when he saw them huddled together, he had seen something of himself, abandoned, unwanted, forced to survive in the cold. Because I know what it's like, he said quietly. Lily tilted her head, suspicion flickering into curiosity. What do you mean? But Richard only shook his head. Some wounds were too raw to explain to a 10-year-old in the middle of the night. Just know you're safe here. That's all." Her eyes lingered on him for a long time before she finally turned and joined her sister. Richard watched from the doorway as Emma snuggled beneath the covers, her small hand reaching out until Lily lay beside her. Within minutes, the little one was asleep, her breathing steady, her teddy bear tucked under her chin. Lily stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, but she didn't ask him to leave. Richard closed the door softly, the quiet click echoing in the vast penthouse. He stood there for a long time, staring at the sterile hallway, suddenly aware that the house had never felt so alive and never so fragile. For the first time in years, Richard Montgomery wasn't thinking about profits or presentations, or even about Elizabeth's wedding invitation. He was thinking about two children sleeping in his guest rooms, and the way their laughter had filled the empty air. And beneath that thought, like a whisper he couldn't silence, another truth coiled in the dark. Bringing them here had changed something. The house was no longer his fortress, it was a glass cage, and something had just begun to stir inside it. Morning broke over the city in streaks of silver, the kind of pale light that made the skyscrapers look ghostly against the clouds. Richard stood at the window of his penthouse, coffee cooling in his hand, staring at the invitation propped on the counter. It was absurd that a slip of card could hold such power, but it did. The date circled in gold ink was only 2 days away. Behind him, the sound of quiet footsteps shuffled into the kitchen. Emma, still in her oversized borrowed pajamas, rubbed her eyes with one hand and held her teddy bear in the other. She climbed onto a stool at the breakfast bar without a word, head lolling to one side. Richard smiled faintly. "Hungry?" She nodded, too sleepy to answer. He pulled out eggs and bread, opting for something simple this time. As he worked, Lily appeared too, her hair already tied back, her eyes sharp and watchful. She wasn't like Emma, unguarded, soft. No, Lily walked into every room as if it were a battlefield. "You don't need to cook for us," she said flatly. "I know," Richard replied, sliding eggs into the pan, "but I want to." She crossed her arms but said nothing more. By the time breakfast was over, the penthouse was alive with the quiet hum of dishes clinking and Emma's humming, off-key but sweet. Richard found himself pausing, watching them. His home had never felt less empty, yet a knot of dread sat in his chest. The wedding loomed like a storm on the horizon. Marcus arrived later that morning, breezing into the penthouse with his usual swagger. He stopped short when he spotted the girls at the dining table, coloring in silence with pens Richard had dug out from an old desk drawer. "Well," Marcus said slowly, glancing at Richard. "This is new." Richard bristled. "They're staying for the weekend." Marcus arched a brow but wisely didn't press. Instead, he gestured at the girls. "If you're serious about showing up at that wedding, you'll need more than charm and a suit. You'll need presentation." "What's that mean?" Lily asked, suspicious as ever. Marcus leaned down slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a great secret. "It means you're about to look like royalty." The next hours were a blur of stylists, tailors, and makeup artists sweeping into the penthouse, arms full of garment bags and cosmetics cases. Emma squealed when a rack of dresses was wheeled in, her tiny fingers reaching for a skirt of shimmering blue tulle. Lily hung back, narrowing her eyes until one of the stylists coaxed her into trying on a simple dress the color of deep wine. She protested at first, but when she caught her reflection in the mirror, Richard saw her expression falter. For a moment, just a moment, she looked like the child she was, not the hardened protector. Richard himself was measured for a suit of midnight black, cut sharper than any boardroom armor he'd ever worn. Standing before the mirror, he almost didn't recognize the man staring back, strong, polished, formidable. But beneath it, the old ache gnawed. Would Elizabeth see through it? Would she see the man she left behind? That evening, the penthouse shimmered with light and life. Emma twirled in her new dress until she collapsed, giggling on the couch. Lily sat by the window, legs tucked under her, staring at the city with a look Richard couldn't quite read. "You don't have to do this," she said suddenly, not looking at him. He set down his glass. "Do what?" "Take us there. Show us off. Pretend we're—" She trailed off, chewing her lip. "Family," Richard finished softly. Her head snapped toward him, eyes flashing. "We're not your family. We're just 2 kids you found on the street." The words stung more than he expected, but he didn't let it show. He nodded slowly. "You're right. You're not my family." He let the silence stretch, then added quietly, But maybe you could be. Lily's breath caught. She looked away, but he saw the battle warring behind her eyes. The suspense grew heavier as the night wore on. Emma fell asleep on the couch, her dress crumpled around her, the teddy bear tucked under her chin. Lily pretended to stay awake, but her eyelids drooped until finally she surrendered beside her sister. Richard stood over them, heart caught in his throat. Tomorrow they would walk into Elizabeth's world, a world of champagne flutes and whispered judgments, of diamonds and cold smiles. He knew how they would look at him, the man who couldn't give, flaunting 2 children that weren't his. But when he looked at Lily and Emma, sleeping together on the couch like fragile, stubborn angels, the fear burned into something else. Not shame, not desperation, but resolve. He whispered into the quiet, as if speaking to himself or to fate itself. If she thought I wasn't enough, let her see what enough really looks like. Outside, thunder rumbled. The storm was coming. The Harrington estate glittered like something torn from a fairy tale. Strings of golden lights wrapped around white columns, crystal chandeliers glowed through vast windows, and violins sang beneath the marquee that stretched across the sprawling lawn. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits spilled across the grounds, champagne flutes in hand, laughter tinkling like glass shards against the night air. The kind of world Elizabeth Carter had always wanted. The kind Richard Montgomery had once believed he could give her, until she proved him wrong. Richard's car rolled to a stop at the edge of the valet circle, its black paint gleaming under the flood of lights. He sat still for a moment, the weight of anticipation pressing down on his chest. Beside him, Lily stared out the window, her expression a mask of iron, while Emma fidgeted with her new dress, clutching her teddy bear with one hand. "You don't have to be afraid," Richard murmured. Though his own palms were damp, Emma whispered, "Will they laugh at us?" Richard met her gaze in the rearview mirror. "If they do, let them. People laugh when they're afraid of what they don't understand." The valet opened his door. The moment he stepped out, the murmur of conversation shifted. Heads turned. Richard Montgomery. The name still carried weight in these circles. But tonight it wasn't his suit or his presence that drew the stares. It was the 2 little girls who stepped carefully from the car after him, small hands clutching his sleeves, their wide eyes soaking in the grandeur. A hush rippled across the crowd, followed quickly by the buzz of whispers. Is he serious? With children? Orphans, maybe? Paid actors? Richard felt the sting of their judgment but kept his back straight, his expression unreadable. Lily's grip tightened on his arm, but she lifted her chin, meeting the stares with a defiance that startled him. Emma, shy and trembling, pressed closer to his side. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with opulence, gilded candelabras, roses cascading from crystal vases, waiters gliding like shadows with trays of champagne. The Harrington name was everywhere, etched into ice sculptures, printed on menus, whispered in reverence. And then she appeared. Elizabeth, draped in ivory silk, her hair swept into an elegant chignon, diamonds flashing at her throat. Time slowed as she glided across the room, William Harrington's hand possessively at her back. Her smile was radiant, the kind of smile meant for photographs, but when her eyes found Richard, the brightness faltered. She froze for a fraction of a second. Long enough for Richard to see it. Long enough for him to know his presence had struck like a blade. Her gaze flicked to the children at his side, confusion darkening into disbelief. Then a flicker of something else. Contempt. The crowd parted around her as she approached. The violin softened. Conversations hushed. Every eye turned toward the tableau unfolding at the center of the ballroom. "Richard," Elizabeth said smoothly, though the sharpness in her eyes betrayed the calm. "I didn't expect you to come." He inclined his head. "I thought it was time." Her gaze flicked again to Lily and Emma. "And you brought company. They're with me," Richard said simply. A brittle laugh escaped her lips. "How convenient. You couldn't give me children, so you found some to play dress-up." The words cut sharper than any knife, and Richard felt Lily stiffen beside him. Emma's eyes welled, her small fingers tightening around his sleeve. For a moment, silence threatened to crush him. He could walk out now, let her win again. But he didn't. "They are not dress-up," he said evenly, his voice carrying across the hall. "They are my guests. My family." The room fell silent. The chandeliers seemed to burn brighter, the air heavier. Elizabeth's smile faltered, cracks spiderwebbing across the perfect porcelain of her composure. From the corner of his vision, Richard saw William Harrington step forward, his jaw tight. But before he could speak, a small trembling voice rose into the silence. "Emma. He's more of a father than anyone else ever was." The words were tiny, fragile, but they hit the room like thunder. Guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes widening, whispers flaring. Lily squeezed her sister's hand, her own face pale but proud. Richard swallowed hard, his throat tight with a swell of emotions he hadn't expected. He placed a steady hand on each girl's shoulder, anchoring them as the storm gathered. Elizabeth's composure shattered completely now. Her eyes burned with fury, her lips twisting as though she wanted to tear him down with words sharper than knives. But the silence around her was no longer on her side. People were watching, judging. And for the first time, Richard wasn't the one being pitied. The violins swelled again, too loud, as if the musicians sensed the danger of silence. Glasses clinked nervously, but the spell wasn't broken. Richard felt it. Something irreversible had shifted. He had walked into Elizabeth's world expecting humiliation, maybe pity. Instead, he had brought with him two small, fragile forces of truth that no amount of wealth, diamonds, or perfect smiles could erase, and the night was only beginning. The music swelled again, desperate to patch the silence that had stretched too long, but the tension in the ballroom was unbreakable. Eyes darted between Richard and Elizabeth like guests watching a play they hadn't paid to see but couldn't look away from. Elizabeth's smile had hardened into a brittle mask. Her hand trembled against the stem of her champagne flute, though she tried to hide it by raising the glass to her lips. Her groom, William Harrington, shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearly unused to being a supporting character at his own wedding. "Richard," Elizabeth said finally, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You never could resist making a scene." Richard met her gaze evenly, the steel in his voice at odds with the calm expression he wore. "Funny, I thought I was simply attending a wedding." A ripple of laughter rose among the guests, cautious, stifled, but it was there. Elizabeth's eyes flicked toward the sound, fury flashing like lightning. Her mask cracked further. "And these children? Are they another one of your business acquisitions? You collect companies, trophies, and now strays?" Lily stiffened, the insult striking her harder than Richard. She opened her mouth, but Richard squeezed her shoulder gently. "Not yet." His eyes never left Elizabeth's. "They are not strays," he said, voice low but carrying across the ballroom. "They are survivors, something you wouldn't understand." The words landed like a slap, and the crowd reacted as if one body. Murmurs spreading like wildfire, whispers sharp and cutting. William stepped forward then, his jaw set. "Elizabeth," he said tightly, "this is our night. Don't let him—" But Elizabeth was already unraveling, her composure disintegrating beneath the weight of her fury. She turned back to Richard, her voice trembling with venom. "You think you can parade them here as if it proves anything? You couldn't give me what I wanted, Richard. You never could. That's why I left you. That's why I found someone who could." The words echoed in the vast hall, and for a moment Richard felt the old wound tear open, raw and bloody. He saw himself again in that rainy night 2 years ago, her ring clinking against his coffee table, her words carving into his chest like a surgeon's scalpel. But before he could speak, a voice cut through the air. "Lily." She stepped forward, chin lifted, eyes blazing with the kind of fire only forged through pain. "He gives us everything, safety, food, a home. You call that nothing?" The room went utterly still. Even the violins faltered, their notes collapsing into silence. Emma, emboldened by her sister, clutched Richard's hand and whispered. But in the silence, everyone heard it. "He's the only one who wanted us." Richard's throat tightened, emotion swelling so violently he nearly faltered. He looked down at them, these two fragile souls who had somehow become his shield, his sword, his truth. He placed a hand on each of their shoulders, steadying himself. "Elizabeth," he said softly, but there was iron beneath the velvet. "You left me because I couldn't give you children. But what you never understood is that family isn't something you demand. It's something you build, something you fight for, something you love. Even when it's inconvenient, even when it's hard." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elizabeth's face had gone pale, Her lips parted as if she might spit back venom, but no words came. William's hand tightened around her arm, his discomfort growing more visible with each heartbeat. Richard didn't wait for her to recover. He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping across the room, catching the stares, the whispers, the judgment. You can laugh, you can whisper. But know this, I didn't come here to prove anything to her. His eyes burned into Elizabeth. I came to prove something to myself. He straightened, pulling Lily and Emma closer. And I did. The silence that followed was deafening. No laughter this time, no cautious ripple of amusement. Just the thick, suffocating awareness that the perfect veneer of the Harrington wedding had cracked, and no one could unsee the truth that had spilled through. Elizabeth's hands trembled, her diamond ring glinting under the lights as though mocking her. Her mask of composure was gone now, leaving behind only raw, naked fury. You think you've won something here? She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, but loud enough for the nearest guest to hear. You'll always be alone, Richard. Always. Richard looked at her for a long, heavy moment. Then he shook his head slowly. No, he said, his voice steady, his hand tightening on Lily and Emma's shoulders. Not anymore, and with that he turned. The girls walked with him, their heads held high, as the ballroom of whispers parted like a sea before them. Behind him, Elizabeth's world trembled on its foundations, while Richard Montgomery, the man she had dismissed as broken, walked away with more than she would ever have. But even as they stepped into the cool night air, Richard knew this wasn't the end. The reveal had been powerful, the statement undeniable, yet something still lingered in the shadows. Elizabeth wasn't finished, and neither was fate. The night air outside the Harrington estate was heavy with the scent of roses and rain. Richard's breath came slow and deliberate, his hands resting on Lily's and Emma's shoulders as they walked down the grand staircase. Every step away from the glittering ballroom felt like a victory, a shedding of chains that had bound him for years. But the storm wasn't finished. Richard. The voice cracked through the night like a whip. Elizabeth's heels clattered against the marble as she stormed after them, diamonds flashing, her silk gown billowing like smoke. Gasps from the doorway followed her, guests spilling out behind her like moths chasing flame. William trailed behind, red-faced, torn between dragging her back and letting her fury play out. Richard turned, his jaw tightening. The twins pressed closer to his side. Elizabeth's face was pale, her eyes wild. Don't you dare walk away like this, she hissed. Not after humiliating me in front of everyone I know. Richard's voice was calm, almost too calm. I didn't humiliate you, Elizabeth. You did that yourself. Her laugh was brittle, unhinged. Oh, don't play saint now. You think you've won with your little display with these children? Do you want to know the truth, Richard? You were never the one who was broken. The words slammed into him like a fist. For a heartbeat, the world tilted. What are you talking about? Elizabeth's chest rose and fell in ragged fury. She stepped closer, her voice cutting through the night. It wasn't you, it was me. I couldn't have children. I found out after I left you. Do you hear me? All those years I told myself you weren't enough when the truth was staring at me in the mirror. I left you for something I never had to begin with. The guests who had followed outside gasped audibly. Even William froze, his expression collapsing into disbelief. Richard's stomach clenched. He had lived half his life carrying the weight of inadequacy. Shame burrowed into his bones like rot, and now, with a single confession, the foundation of that pain cracked apart. But before he could speak, another voice sliced through the stunned silence. Lily, you talk about children like they're trophies, like they're things you deserve. Her voice trembled, but her eyes blazed. We're not trophies. We're not props. We're people, and you don't deserve us, not him, not anyone. Elizabeth's face crumpled, fury and humiliation twisting together. You insolent little... Enough! Richard's voice thundered, louder than it had ever been, silencing the night and freezing Elizabeth mid-sentence. His chest rose and fell, his eyes locked on hers, no longer the eyes of a man begging for her love, but of a man who had found his truth. You broke me once, he said, each word deliberate. But I will never let you break them. Not with your lies, not with your poison. Elizabeth's lips trembled, words failing her for the first time that evening. Around her, the guests whispered like vultures circling. William finally stepped forward, his hand gripping her arm, his face flushed with embarrassment and fury. "This is over," he snapped, dragging her back toward the ballroom. "You've said enough." And just like that, the perfect image of Elizabeth Carter shattered before the world she had so carefully curated. Richard turned back to the girls, their faces pale but unbroken. Emma clung to his hand, her teddy bear pressed against her chest, while Lily stood tall, shoulders squared. Though her small frame shook, he knelt before them, his eyes softening, his voice low enough for only them to hear. "You're right. You're not trophies. You're not props. You're family, if you'll have me." Lily blinked rapidly, fighting the tears she refused to let fall. Emma whispered, "We already do." Something inside Richard broke and healed all at once. He pulled them both into his arms, holding them close, the weight of years of loneliness finally lifting. The whispers of the crowd faded into nothing. The Harrington estate, with its chandeliers and roses and judgments, ceased to matter. For the first time in years, Richard Montgomery was not alone. As he led the girls toward the waiting car, he felt a strange stillness settle in his chest. The future was uncertain. Adoption papers, battles with the system, the long road of learning how to be the father they deserved. But it didn't matter. He wasn't walking into it empty anymore. Behind him, Elizabeth's world collapsed under the weight of her own lies. Ahead of him, a fragile but unbreakable bond stretched into the unknown. And somewhere, deep in his soul, Richard whispered the words he had once thought he would never believe again. "I am enough." The night swallowed them as the car door closed, carrying them away from the ghosts of the past, toward something raw, unpredictable, and real.